Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the War Report. Take two. We had a little bit of technical difficulties just a couple minutes back, but getting into it, we got quite a bit of news this week. We'll get into some of the Ukraine stuff with Turkey, but I want to start out with some European Union news, and particularly from French President Emmanuel Macron. He made some very interesting comments the other day. This article is actually a couple weeks old. I don't know how we missed this, but I think it's still worth bringing up in regards to the current direction of the European Union, the impending power struggles upon Merkel's departure from office. But according to this leaked web chat he participated in, the French president called, uh, let's just, he said, I honestly couldn't care less about them, says Macron. And the context of that, in a recent web chat the French president participated in, has been causing all the chaos. Quote, why should I care more about Denmark or Poland over Italy or Portugal? I like to be in the company of civilized people in this union. It goes on further to say, a new leak is causing chaos in Europe. Emmanuel Macron's word about Slavic and Germanic countries last Saturday is shaking the European Union. In the leaks, the French president calls them uncivilized, barbaric, saying even, honestly, they disgust me with those square and round heads. In the leaks, he was heard calling Merkel a Turk lover and the Poles closet homosexuals. Now, the leaks are, of course, sweeping across Europe and French politics, and this is about a year out from the upcoming French election, just to put that in context. So, as I said previously in previous episodes, I believe Macron is probably one of the only Western leaders at this point who could go toe-to-toe with countries like Russia, like China, like the United States. I think, in terms of Western leaders, Trump, despite his buffonishness, carried some of that. I think he could go hardball with these non-Western leaders. Unlike some of these leaders like Merkel or Boris Johnson or Theresa May or any British Prime Minister in recent history, or even any French president in recent history. And Italy, I think there's too many prime ministers to go through to accurately gauge. But again, just in terms of Western European countries, you think the Scandinavian states, Finland, Denmark, Netherlands, etc., Belgium. Again, these sort of countries where you expect the leaders to be calm and reserved and sophisticated, and etc. But you have Macron coming out and saying this. Now, the funny thing is, this is far, quote-unquote, worse than any of the comments Trump allegedly made during his time about any foreign countries or foreign leaders, or just his conduct behind closed doors that they always accused him of, that they always had some new hit piece about, or some new tell-all article exposing the Trump administration and his racism and his bigotry and his ignorance or whatever. But I just find this all very interesting in the context of European unity and the direction that Europe is going. And with Merkel's last days in office, she's teetering on leaving office in September. So that is, I think the elections are about 5 months from now. It'll be sometime in mid-September. I think September 17th is it. And of course, the leader within the Christian Democratic Party set to succeed her is a bit more, as we've said, a bit more open to cooperation with Russia, skeptical of the Western policy, particularly the American policy, in places like Syria and Iran. And with all that being said, he isn't necessarily, from what I've seen, a strong political figure. He seems like your typical reserved German politician that will be kind of a pushover and really accept what the outside powers tell to him. Now, I think the only difference is he'll put more resistance on the American side, will give him more leniency on the Russian side and Chinese side, but I don't expect him to be a strong figure standing up for German national interests. And this is a very interesting time within European politics because for the past, 16 years now, 12, 16 years, Merkel has been the face of the European Union. She has been the face of European unity. Germany has been the head of this organization, which we'll get into some of the news about the AfD and their comments about the European Union in a minute here. But ever since 2017, it looked like Macron was poised to really seize this position. And I jokingly, again, I would call him things like the neoliberal Napoleon, all that kind of stuff. But it looks like I underestimated him in terms of how effective of a statesman he was actually going to be. And these most recent quotes, I think they're probably as funny as when he first got elected, his quote saying, my thoughts are too complex for these journalists. And one of the other ones that happened was, it's, again, just like all these things, but keep in mind, this was the guy who was supposed to restore credibility to the liberal world order after America failed to elect Hillary Clinton and let liberalism reign and let women's rights or whatever reign. Macron was supposed to be the centrist liberal counter to Trump, and I think at the end of the day, Macron was the real Trump. Love him or hate him, especially rhetorically, I think in terms of his impact in geopolitics, now, Macron would not have been possible without Trump. Let that be said. And I feared under Biden he would revert. But I think it has gone too far. I think French politics has gone too far to the point where he has to carry through with his new sort of rhetoric. But at the end of the day, I do think he's one of the few Western leaders. And despite being billed as this reserved and astute figure, that could go toe to toe with places like Russia and China and people like Xi and Putin, and even into the Middle East, places like Saudi Arabia and Iran and other Gulf states like that. He seems like the only West, which is funny because you'll remember during the Khashoggi crisis, which we've discussed extensively on the show, him and Mohammed bin Salman looked like a bickering old married couple when they were discussing this about the journalist. But at the end of the day, I still think Macron, it's not saying much, it's a pretty low bar, probably has the best ability to go toe to toe with non-Western leaders and the actual power players of the world out of any European leader at this point. Correction, any European leader of a country that holds significant sway. For example, there's some Eastern European politicians, you may think somebody like Orban, who rhetorically, in terms of the way he conducts himself, maybe, but in terms of the geopolitical influence of a country like Hungary versus a country like France, I think the difference is self-evident.
Much like Trump, every time you think I'm disgusted, I've had enough, he does something that brings you back in. Just when you think you're out. It was very unexpected. I laughed so hard at this. I like how it has all the, I like how it reflects basically the inner tensions of Europeans and their history, right? Every has a certain kind of chauvinism, and every region belongs into an even larger ethnogenesis, if you will, and they have their hubris. But that was I thought it was hilarious. I certainly didn't find it offensive.
Well, I'm just saying, as somebody is part
Probably
of,
because it's so just.
as somebody who's proudly part of Med Gang, I very much appreciated it. Even with my affinity towards the Slavic people, especially the Russians, I have a lot of respect for them. I think they're great people. But as somebody again who is part of Med Gang, proudly of Italian heritage, I couldn't get enough of this. And coming from a Frenchman of all people.
Yeah, it was really surprising. I haven't seen it posted elsewhere. There's going to be a certain amount of damage control that is going to be applied right now. So, I don't expect it to, right?
Oh, of course, and I imagine a lot of it
but
is.
I
imagine a lot of it is probably harder to find in English language media, seeing it as primarily a French-German dispute.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment.
And with that being said, it does sort of play on what we were saying about 2-3 years ago, where we don't particularly see the European Union breaking up, at least officially, but a formation of regional blocks within the European Union that are at odds with each other. And as I think Macron from 2019 onward, from the Yellow Vest onward, when he had to make all those concessions, has really laid the foundation for this. Because, again, you had him calling Merkel a Turk lover, and you have a lot of strategic ties between Germany and Turkey and Germany and Eastern Europe. Whereas Macron really power played in the European Union by representing these at least on the picture now, again, maybe personal bias applies here, these downtrodden southern European countries that have been screwed over by the Union, like Spain, like Italy, like Greece, especially Greece with the recent crisis throughout last year and throughout the migrant crisis and the Turkish threats, and yeah, especially the French Turkish rivalry that's budding right now. It seems like he has really found a new angle of attack, and that this is his power play within the European Union as the face of the European Union, as the person who has represented it for the past, what, 12, 16 years. Merkel is poised to leave office in, like I said, 5 months, 4.5 months, I think. There's sometime mid September, so I would put out about 5 months. And, as I was also saying, yeah, this guy poised to replace her within the CDU, he may be all these things. He may be more sympathetic on those ends, but at the end of the day, I don't see him being a strong power player. And I'm not saying Merkel was necessarily a strong power player. I think she was decent diplomatically for Germany's position and for what her goals were. But at the end of the day, I think somebody with the ambition of Macron and somebody with or not even going beyond Macron. I think Macron has shifted the Overton window in terms of France's position in the European Union and the world stage. That even if somebody like Le Pen or one of these other opposition figures were to come in power, they would still have to play into sort of his foreign policy goals. And I just think it's the direction that France is being pushed in, regardless of who's in office. I just think Macron is a great embodiment of it and somebody who is really either lucky or knows what he's doing when he makes these moves and says these things.
That's a great observation. Macron definitely represents the future in terms of the instability that we're seeing, and it's not because Trump got into office. Trump wasn't. Trump was symptomatic. He's not a cause by any means. It is a reaction, and it is also a kind of Republican grift where dog whistles are given to Republicans, particularly white Americans, right of center Americans. But they're not going to actually do anything about it. It's just a way to garner votes, essentially, right? Despite that happening, the rhetoric really had to be amped up in order to achieve that. And it's within this environment that Macron also comes out of. Yeah, you're right. He is a reaction to Trump. But that's a very that's absolutely true. But I think a lot of normies tend to look at Trump as a total aberration, as if everything prior was okay. And again, you're right. In many ways, Macron has said some far more outrageous, outlandish things than Trump ever did. So, yeah, you're right. He's moved the Overton window, and he kind of reflects where things are going. Merkel very much is a product of the past. It was that status quo throughout the 2000s,
Yeah, it was that
and in the last
2000
decade
center
as
right,
well.
like we're right wing, but we're not like those American Republicans under Bush. But again, it was sort of that
Yeah.
line that they pull, like, oh, we're socially moderate, but we're fiscally conservative, and even that sort of changed with Merkel coming to office. But pretty much, I would say the entire German political paradigm, and arguably the AFD, because I think the AFD's leadership isn't the most competent, as we'll get into. I think just the German paradigm, political paradigm, is just out of tune with Europe and the rest of the world. Where somebody like Macron, where he may be quite literally a former Rothschilds banker, all this sort of stuff, he has his finger on the pulse. He knows what's going on. Even again, these Front National politicians like Le Pen, I think also have their fingers on the pulse. I think it's beyond just individual political figures and individual parties. I think it's a French view on the situation versus a German view on the situation. I think the Germans have slowly but surely adapted, especially with this whole Nord Stream 2 thing and with Biden coming to office. It's funny because you thought Biden was going to reconcile all these fractured European relationships, but it seems like Germany is moving closer to Russia than it even was under Trump. So I thought that was entertaining, but at the end of the day, I think it ultimately comes down to different national and cultural understandings of the issues rather than individual politicians or political parties and platforms.
Right, because it's becoming realpolitik, and that's one of the reasons why I think Macron feels like he can even say these sort of things over a Zoom call, while he presupposes that it's not going to be leaked or whatever. To do that, you have to believe that on some level the atmosphere has changed, that divisions are growing, certain opinions from the past are merging about other Europeans, are merging within a new demographic. I'm sorry, not a new demographic, a new dynamic. In the way that he calls the Pole, like he looks down on the Poles, but he calls them not homophobic, but closeted homosexuals, right? So there's that, like you say, it's this kind of, new France, a new bizarre kind of French nationalism, if you will. Uh, he also has said that, or at least one of his ministers accused Le Pen of being too soft on Muslims. So he's just all over the place. It's realpolitik. They want to win. Um, Things have changed considerably, and I think we're going to see more unusual statements emerge in the next 5 years.
Now, speaking of unusual statements, the AFD, the Alternative for Germany, or however you say it in German, something something Deutschland. That's all I know. But perhaps I should be a bit more well versed on European languages doing a show like this. Not that I'm horrible, but that's beside the point. They have come out and endorsed I suppose you call it a Germexit, but point being is they have endorsed that they believe that Germans should leave the European Union, which I think in Germany is probably a very controversial position because there's the view that, well, the European Union is such a drain on us. We have to send all this money to Poland. We have to send all this money to Greece, etc. But it's also great for Germany because they get to reap the benefits. It's unironically the German dream. I know this is still a joke, the Fourth Reich, whatever, of German hegemonic control over Europe. Now, it's German hegemonic control over Europe contingent on them being docile to American imperial power, but it's German domination over Europe nonetheless. And with that being said, with all of that being said, I don't know what their angle is on. Because even if they. And I believe the AFD is pro Nord Stream 2. I believe that a lot of their politicians might not be official party platform, is they want to try to normalize relations with Russia. So I don't know what the strategic angle is of this. Because it seems like among the German electorate, not that they were the most popular party in the world anyway, I think they only have like 12 or 13% of the seats in the German parliament right now. But I don't know what their strategy is in this upcoming election. I don't know if you want to play in tinfoil hat. Maybe it's real sabotage, but that just brings up the question of the German elections in general. I really have no idea where they're going to go because the CDU, the Christian Democratic Union, held on by the skin of their teeth last time, just barely delivering Merkel power. And you saw a massive rise in the AFD. Now, of course, immediately after the election, you had a bunch of resignations and shuffling around within the party that did a number on it. Maybe it's their more other right wing party that's, I think they bill themselves as a pro business party that's is somewhat socially conservative, but they're also really on the fiscally conservative side. Something like what the American Republican Party at least bills itself to be, whereas the AFD is more on the national conservative side and the nationalistic side. So we'll see how that all plays out. But it just in terms of the German elections in general, I've seen this idea thrown around, and I just want to bring it onto the show because I said a few episodes ago that I would expect a lot of American involvement, a lot of State Department involvement in the upcoming German elections in regards to Nord Stream 2. Now, one of the interesting takes I saw on this was the Americans and the anti Nord Stream people might support the Green Party and use the guise of environmentalism, use this environmentalist party that wants to go to clean renewable energy, etc., to attack this oil and gas industry that is propping up Russia, or is perceived to prop up Russia. I'd say it's only about 6% of their exports. Still a major sector in their economy. Don't get me wrong, but I have heard the theory, and I think it's not too bad. I think they might be onto something that you may see State Department or clandestine support for the Green Party's electoral efforts. Maybe not even necessarily get them in power, but to give them enough of a political position to sabotage German energy efforts under the guise of we have to protect the environment. This is so horrible for it, and we have to shut down these pipelines because pipelines are bad. Kind of similar to what they did to the Keystone pipeline, where they, in my opinion at least, deliberately crippled American energy under the guise of quote unquote protecting the environment.
Yeah, I don't quite know what to make of that. It does seem like America would have to have something in the bag. Like there would be something there that this decision, which is so counterintuitive, would all make sense in the very near future. It does feel like that to me. Um, and I don't see it. I don't see what it is that's coming in the next year that getting rid of the Keystone pipeline um, will have been obviously the right thing to do because we have to think that you know China has been buying and sell has been buying oil and gas in the largest possible way for years, and it doesn't do it with the American dollar, right? That's a big deal, and they're buying a lot with from the Russians, and that too is happening some with the yuan, and sometimes with the yuan and the ruble, sometimes with gold. Like it's not, it's not happening the way people think it's happening. Um, so what is going on? How is this going to make sense? And of course, a lot of it doesn't make sense. I don't, I can see how this is a kind of soft power posturing. Um, yes, so as you pointed out, 6% of Russian imports is energy, much less than what people would have thought. Uh, however, it seems like again, like Navalny, this was basically it's for a Western audience. It's not. It's not meant to affect Russia. I mean, if it is, I honestly don't see how that's possible. Russians literally don't care about this stuff. The thing that brings down the Russian politicians down in Russia is, if they're not building better roads, I mean, if they're not improving
Increasing tax on
people's
alcohol.
lives, yeah, just um, you know, if that's not going, like these are very pragmatic concerns. They don't really enjoy talking about politics. In my experience of all the times that I've been there, they don't like talking about it. And if you bring up what they're doing in the West, they either don't believe you or some of them know because they just think it's so outrageous, it's impossible, or they find it incredibly depressing, like they're just beside themselves. So how is this going to work on the Russian public? How are you going to nurture the same, Green Party concerns in Russia? The way that has organically grown over half a century, far longer than that in the U.S. and in Western Europe. It's simply not there.
Yeah, especially not in Russia. But what I'm really thinking about is, like I said, especially with the Democrat in office, pushing the Green Party in Germany is going to be. I I'm willing to, like if I was a betting man, let's put it that way. I would put money that there would be some American intervention in the German election to support the Green Party, or maybe even just quote unquote grassroots environmental causes within Germany, within the countries connected to Nord Stream, outside of Russia, the place they could push this. Like I think Denmark's another one, and I think that will be the path going forward with them because really, short of sabotage, short of sending CIA agents to plausibly deniable ways, quote unquote, destroy the pipeline or whatever, I don't see any way they can undermine it beyond environmental regulations. Like we've said, they've been doing this for years. Any environmental regulation that has come out has not been out of the concern of nature or ecology or any of this. It has been purely to cripple rivals within the energy industry, whether that be the renewable supporting people like wind and solar attacking oil, or or oil companies even attacking each other in foreign countries, whatever. But point being is, like I said, I would put money on the fact that there will be some sort of American intervention in support of the German Green Party and German environmentalism moving forward into the next few months. I know the election cycles within countries like Germany are much shorter than the American election cycles. Now I would say around July, August, look out for that. Look out for that sort of propaganda being pushed in Germany. If we have any German speakers out there who can possibly translate some German media or link to something that would give us more of an insight in German media, that would be great to have a further look into that. But yeah, just keep us posted. We'll try to keep up with this as much as possible. Like it is a bit harder to find news sources on some of these foreign elections, especially when you get into the nitty gritty details, because most of them are just basic overviews in English language media. But we'll definitely have to see going forward. And like I said, Germany's going to be the big pivotal ground here, and between that and the AFD sort of shooting themselves in the foot, we'll really have to see where this goes. But trust me, you will not get a shortage of news on the upcoming German elections from this show, so long as we are willing and able to do it, which for the foreseeable future should not be a problem. Hopefully, our overlords here on YouTube will be generous enough. Now, I am still looking out. I do have the shows on BitChute. I do have to get that probably put up where they automatically upload. I am looking to another few other platforms, but that's all aside the point. With all that being said, German elections coming up soon. Expect quote unquote environmentalism to be a big issue in this, at least from the Anglosphere media coverage of them. That's all I'm going to say about the issue for now.
Right, and there was a German politician who mentioned the Biden party is on a warpath, and that America is trying to stop Nord Stream 2, and that this is futile. Nord Stream 2 is going to be completed. So the rhetoric is ramping up, and it's still at times almost belligerent, but definitely defiant against America. And this comes from Germany looking out for its best interests. It's not ideological, but it is a necessity. They just lost a huge EU partner in Britain, and they're looking forward to keeping the edifice of the EU going into the future. And for that, they're going to need a cheap, high quality product that Russia supplies. American gas is of lower quality, it's less dependable, and it is more expensive.
And
For them to
especially in light of the
supply
Suez
Germany.
crisis, Middle Eastern energy. I mean, not that the Middle East has ever been stable, but I think especially after the Suez crisis, a lot of people are going to feel uncomfortable with all those energy resources coming through such a what has been shown to be delicate canal, if you will. And again, I know Germany was part of the JCPOA, the five nuclear powers plus Germany as they build it, but and it's especially with the crackdown on sanctions, it looked like Germany has caved on the cooperation with Iran, but even countries like Saudi Arabia, the most stable and steady source of energy they can get is from Russia because, like I said, like you said, shipping American gas is too expensive. bringing gas from the Middle East is becoming riskier and riskier as time goes on. Especially, I would say, pretty much since Iraq, it's become a very untenable proposition. And yeah, that leaves Russia.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it's another example of America soften its foot. If the Middle East had been more stable, just basically from an argumentative point of view, you could say that you've given the enemy, an argument why they should not invest in your gas or in Middle Eastern gas and focus on gas from Russia. Uh,
And
you can't have it all. You can't uh, destroy an entire region and then still demand people buy it from there or from yourself.
I will say this: I think, and it is rare occasion that I will praise Obama's policies, or I don't know, maybe it's the people behind Obama because again, I don't know how intelligent the man is. I don't know how much of a how tapped in he is in the situation. I know, especially the Iran deal, he was very involved with Brzezinski, but I think Obama's team, especially the people who made the Iran deal, had some foresight on this that something's got to give. Now, if we can make a deal with the devil, quote unquote, with Iran, that will disempower Russia. That was the entire point of the Iran deal from the get go, which was a bit of a surprise that Russia and China signed on in the first place. Maybe they had the foresight to realize the next Republican will tear this thing up. And you know what? They were right. But I do think Obama's team, Obama's foreign policy team, John Kerry, etc., had the foresight to see we need to secure a stable line of energy for the Europeans because they're not going to pay high dollar for American gas. But this was just at the beginning of the American energy boom in 2014, 2015. So what it came down to is they're not going to pay high dollar for American gas. We don't want them to have Russian gas. What's the only solution? Middle Eastern energy? Yeah, okay, there's Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is in a budget crisis right now. So let's cave. It looks like the best capitulation we could make in terms of our foreign policy is it looks like we're gonna have to give some ground to the Iranians and make a nuclear deal with them, and that worked up until 2018, 2019 when you had a lot of the tanker wars going on, especially in spring, summer 2019, which really deterred a lot of that, and of course Trump brought Europe back onto the sanctions program. Even countries that held out at first, like Germany and France, eventually came back to the sanctions. So it looks like through successive administration policies, especially Trump, it has given the Europeans no choice but to accept Russian energy resources, at least so long as they're going to stay on oil and gas. And you can get into the merits of alternative energy, particularly nuclear. Maybe that's the way out for this, as we've discussed. But we've also discussed Russia is Russia is also excels at nuclear power and excels at building power plants. I mean, they helped the Iranians build their power plants, so what's to stop them from helping the Europeans build their power plants? So
Mhm.
that wouldn't it would be a dent in the budget. It's definitely much more profitable for Russia to sell oil and gas, but there's still a lot of money to be made for the Russians in the nuclear sector as well. But going back to what I was saying, pretty much Europe has been put in this position where the safest and most stable way to get their energy, most reliable way to get their energy, is through Russia.
Yeah, basically, it's the pipeline. That's what does it. Like even if it were any other country, it would still be because there's a pipeline, and that's just the most efficient way. And Russia is the closest country, and Russia has, for the money, the best product, and it just is longer, more trouble, requires more refinement. Um, I mean, if you want to put it, shipping that much gas and oil to Europe to replace all Russian supplies would basically bring about which are of a spill. One could use that argument. I know that there's an argument for pipelines as well, but generally speaking, much more vulnerable when it comes to that.
One last thing I will say about European energy prospects is you've seen France engage in a lot of this in the past few years, trying to build a customs union between their former colonies and even some of their non-former colonies, especially in Africa, sort of embarking on the same sort of mission China is in Africa, where they're investing in a lot of these countries, expecting a big payout and expecting to seize assets when they can't remake those payments. So you could see with a lot of these French very limited interventions in Africa that they're trying to pretty much secure those sort of resources from their former colonies where applicable. And that may very well be the case. Now, again, I don't think that's enough to supply Europe as a whole. Maybe France as a whole, it could keep their energy needs and their resource needs, but that's another possibility you could see. And I think we've sort of seen this in terms of American policy in the Middle East. This quote unquote neo-colonialism, where you set it up to the point where you try to extract these resources from these colonies without actually calling them colonies. Now, I wouldn't exactly call the American policy in the Middle East because of how incoherent and just um, complex it is, neo-colonialism, but I would call the French policy that, and that could be a operating strategy going forward. I know the British have tried to, since they left the European Union, cooperate a lot with their Commonwealth states, especially the Anglosphere Commonwealth states such as Canada, Australia, New Zealand, etc. So that might be the new path
Mm-hmm.
forward, but especially for Germany and for most of Europe, the only viable path forward, I will reiterate, is Russian energy resources, whether they like it or not.
Yeah,
But with all that being said, speaking of Europe,
yeah. I mean,
speaking of Russia, I think we should move into Ukraine. Now, the biggest news out of Ukraine this week is actually involves Turkey. Now, Erdogan has met with Zelensky to give Turkey support to Ukraine in this recent crisis, and saying we stand with you, we'll treat you like an ally, and we'll be with you and help you stave off these separatists and these Russian aggressions. Now, of course, Turkey hasn't deployed any troops yet, but maybe the Donbass is the new location for the rooted Syrian rebels. They went from Syria to Libya to Azerbaijan. Maybe the steppes of eastern Ukraine is the next place they will be deployed. Wouldn't that be something? A bunch of Uyghurs and Turkmen fighting against Russian separatists in the Donbass. I mean, you've already had Chechens, mind you, join the pro-Ukrainian forces to fight against him. You even had some Chechens join the pro-Russian forces. But I don't think
yes.
Turkey is that brazen, but I wouldn't have expected them to send troops into Azerbaijan, or should I say, militias into Azerbaijan. Turkey has been very brazen. They've done a lot of things I would not have expected of them, but we could, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but if we got reports within the coming weeks that there were fighters that have been in Syria or Libya in the Donbass right now helping these pro Ukrainian forces, I would not be surprised in the slightest. Now, I think a lot of the support will probably come down to just a lot of material support and uh, that sort of thing, such as non-lethal aid or maybe even lethal aid to the forces of Ukraine and the pro-Ukrainian militias. But it looks like Zelensky is so determined to take Crimea back, he's willing to enlist the help of the Tatars to do it. That's what this looks like, which is ironically enough, I know like a lot of the Tatars, especially throughout the 20th, 19th and 20th centuries, with a lot of the populations exchanges that happened all across the world, mind you. A lot of them have been relocated to more towards Central Russia, more towards Central Asia, but there is still a sizable Crimean Tatar population, and I don't think they were too opposed to the occupation. Again, they expected them to be the big wedge that the Russians will oppress the Muslim Tatars, and that didn't happen. So we could get an interesting situation where Turkey really, I don't know, maybe this is part of Erdogan's further pan-Turkic plan. He's trying to return the Asiatic population to Crimea, and again, this is the sort of brazenness you would expect from somebody like Erdogan. And now working out his angle, because he has been very pro-Russia lately, just in the past, I would say, year or so, as with the S-400 purchases, with his snubbing of NATO, with his disputes with the French, he has leaned very eastward as opposed to westward now. I think right now what he's doing is he's trying to get back into the good grace of the West, really taking out this Ukraine cause as his own. Because I will say, Macron and Erdogan are almost mirror images of each other in terms of their brazenness and in terms of their ambition. Now, Erdogan can get away with more because of Turkey's strategic position and because he's Turkish as opposed to a white Northwestern European. But the point stands is, in terms of the brazenness, in terms of the gambles they're willing to take on geopolitical issues, on these sort of issues, he can get away with this. And like I said, maybe this is the perfect low risk, high reward prospect that he's looking for to reingratiate himself with the West. And maybe there's some behind the doors dispute between him and Russia. Maybe he's leveraging the Russians by threatening to support Ukraine. Now, I don't know how much an effective leverage that will be, but or at the end of the day, I think we could, no matter what it is a move of power projection. It is a move to show that Turkey is down at power. We will assert our interest in the Black Sea. Crimea being in the Black Sea, Turkey, Black Sea, etc. And we're going to have a say in this situation because we're in the region. We're on Russia's doorstep, and so is Ukraine, and we have a common interest insofar as that is involved. But it will be interesting when you see the red Turkish banner with that crescent, possibly flying over Crimea, possibly flying into Ukraine. I know that you've had the various different banners throughout Ukraine. You've had the old Imperial Russian flags, you've had the Soviet flags, you've had the Ukrainians flying swastika flags. You've had all sorts of different flags. You've had the Novorossiya one, which looks like a Confederate flag without the stars. Maybe the Turkish flag will be the next one to fly. And maybe if we get maybe if it goes absurdly enough, we'll see that free Syrian flag with the green, white, and black with the red stars. But yeah, maybe that's the next place that the, as I said, Syrian rebels are going. But at this point, I think if Turkey is to even live through with its promises, it's going to be material aid and advisors, as most other countries have sent.
Right, and in the articles that I've read, basically there's hint at drones, suicide drones, as well as drones that drop
And
munitions.
there it is. Syria, Azerbaijan, Libya. No, no, no,
Right. And obviously, nink and a wad. It's a nink. It's a wink and a nod to what happened in Nagorno-Karabakh. Now, last year, you know, Erdogan is the consummate politician. I've never seen somebody that play both sides the way he can. I don't even think it's. I mean, yes, you could argue that Russia has really stepped up its bombing campaign. I'm not implying that Erdogan is, of course, this unconditionally by any means, but on some level, is this giving trouble to Syria and various Kurdish factions in the north of Syria? Is not something that concerns Erdogan. I think he'd be quite happy with it. But the truth is, they've also attacked his forces. They're a complete wild card, and the attacks have been very few. They can't be a problem for him if they, I suppose if they apply themselves. But that's not really where they're directed. In fact, if you want to believe what the state said, the latest Baghdadi that was killed in 2019 was in Idlib, and here is the rub, that in Idlib is where Russia has basically just gone on a free-willing bombing campaign for well over a month right now. They're not shy about it. They're not getting any pushback from the West whatsoever. They've targeted the outskirts of Idlib city itself, but they've also bombed anywhere from 5 or 6 towns just in the last week. But again, I stress this has been going on for quite a while. This isn't, to ignore the fact that they're also bombing in central Syria, right? Something less of a concern for Erdogan. But, he would rather that Russia be occupied in central eastern Syria rather than in Idlib. And it could be that. But honestly, I think that Erdogan, has a plan. I do. I don't think it's willy-nilly. I think even if Russia weren't doing that, first of all, he was already in talks with Ukraine long before. He understands the access that Ukraine belongs in, right? Ukraine belongs with Israel, America, Saudi Arabia, Qatar. That's the axis that they belong to. Turkey is part of that, but Turkey can also step outside of that if it chooses to, with very few repercussions. So I think that, for instance, Erdogan could argue that, you know, Nord Stream 2 isn't particularly good for him as a hub of Russian oil and Russian gas, going into Europe vis-a-vis Turkey. That could be looked at as a competition. That it would be, it would be better if the Americans maybe were doing that. He's always going to play both sides, and that's why I say he's the consummate politician. And I don't think a lot of these facts. I think they matter, but I think they speed up his decision-making process. I don't think they necessarily decide his decision-making process. He cannot be on either side for very long. That would be suicide for him.
Oh yes, absolutely, and I would say that just goes to Turkey's, and you want to go even earlier, the Ottoman position, since I would say their decline towards the 18th, 19th century, where they've had to be a geopolitical wild card, where they've had to be the one who stands out, who could really be the power player, but doesn't have the luxury of really choosing a side or even being its own side. Now, again, time will tell with all of this, and again, I'm just amazed by the brazenness of this man, and
Yeah.
I have, believe it or not, a certain respect for Erdogan just because of how successful of a statesman he is. I would say he's up there with somebody like Putin in terms of playing his country's cards right. I would say, I mean, truly, you wouldn't realize it if you just look at the headlines, especially in American politics. But we are in an era of pretty great statesmen. People like Putin, people like Xi Jinping, people like Macron and Erdogan. Love or hate these people, agree with their policies or not, they're good at what they do. And this is something I would say we haven't
Yeah.
seen since before World War One in terms of this multi-power rivalry, cooperation, and these multi-power dynamics, if you will. Because yeah, ever since the end of World War One or World War Two into the Cold War, it's just been U.S., Soviet Union, uh, lukewarm diplomacy on the surface, espionage behind the scenes, and everyone plays nice in politics, at least on the surface, until they call for bombing a country, which is apparently the respectable thing to do, or whatever they want to call it. But point being is, we're truly witnessing an era that nobody alive has ever witnessed today, because, like I said, the last time we had these sort of dynamics in international diplomacy and in geopolitics, like it was probably in the 19th century.
Yeah, I don't think that's an unfair comparison. Also, the fire under Erdogan's feet, of course, is also, as you mentioned earlier, a struggling economy, and he really has to make the most of it. Um, let's not forget that in the last 4 years, that's when it was essentially cemented that Turkey would never be part of the EU. I think that's when it was finally made explicit. And so there is a resentment on on Erdogan's part that could mean in real life terms IMF loans. So he has had to partner up with various different players and sometimes go against cross purposes. Sometimes it would look unintuitive what he's doing. It could even look desperate, but he's managed to really worm his way into Libya. He was successful in Azerbaijan. He properly gauged what the American reaction would be in northern Syria with regards to the Kurds, and he guessed right. So, yeah, he's indisputably probably the most important statesman, maybe of the last year, and definitely in the Middle East. I don't think there's a question about that. Wily as he is, you may not like him, you may not like his country, but I strongly support that idea.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what your opinion on the man is, but like the amount of power he has managed to wield, given his situation, is undeniable. And if you hate him, denying this is only going to hurt you because you have, again, I'm not a fan of Erdogan. I'm not a fan of Turkey in general. You have a pretty worthy adversary, if you will, in charge of this beast. And really, unless there's some sort of coup attempt like in 2016 or his internal popularity just plummets to single digits or whatever, he's around for the foreseeable future. And I'm pretty sure he's only in his 60s, so we could conceivably see another 10, 15 years of him running Turkey. Similar to a Putin style situation in Russia. He could, and then, I won't call him an outright dictator, but he has pretty dictatorial powers, and it's and decent popular support among the Turkish people. He actually, one thing I can also really admire about him, and one thing I think we should learn from in terms of domestic politics, is he was able to reverse the tide of the liberalization of Turkey by weaponizing ruralite conservative populations against urban liberal populations. And that's probably one of the most impressive internal politics moves I've seen in probably my lifetime, my entire time paying attention to politics these past few years. But I would say, again, there's a lot we can learn from him in terms of statesmanship, in terms of governing his country. But at the end of the day, like I said, I think he's probably one of the most pivotal figures in the world right now, and undisputedly one of the most pivotal figures in the Middle East. And so pivotal, in fact, he is trying to start Crimean War 2.0. Now, it will be interesting with the French Turkish rivalry because it seems like when one instigates a conflict or gets involved, the other one gets involved on the other side. Will we finally see Macron say Crimea is Russia? Time will tell.
Damn it, Putler wins again.
I don't know how he does it. For every masterful move Erdogan makes, Putler's right there, 3 steps ahead of him. He must be stopped. But with Erdogan mentioned, with the Middle East mentioned, we'll move on to a little bit of Syria news before closing out with our East Asian news. So more of the usual in Syria, mainly fights and conflicts and skirmishes within northwestern Syria and northern Syria. Turkey's continued their shelling operation towards Kurdish groups. Russia's pushing further. Quite a few rebel casualties this week in the Idlib province and outside of Idlib. And it just keeps going further and further. Not much word, not much action out of any of this. And pretty much just a business as usual week in Syria. Some small ISIS attacks in eastern Syria towards Deir ez-Zor and in central Syria towards the Al Raqqa governorate with the Kurdish and Syrian government borders. No word on American action. Israel hasn't really said much. Now, Israel had some problems with the Iranians today. Apparently, there was a breach of one of the facilities. One of the facilities, I think, had like some sort of radiation attack on it, is what they're alleging, and they're blaming the Israeli forces for it. And with Israel, the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, Biden's Secretary of Defense, is paying a visit there for, of course, to review their strategic ties and to solidify relations within the region. Now, you would think this is normally the role of the Secretary of State, but considering the fact that he's probably dealing with exclusively military matters, he's over there to pretty much affirm our relationship with Israel, which is pretty. I would say I would not have expected this from the Biden administration. I expected Biden and Netanyahu to have a pretty adversarial relationship, calling back to the Obama years, but it looks like they've taken that in the other direction, which is a surprise that you're getting so much Democratic support, whether that be from Biden himself, Kamala, Blinken. Now, Blinken's not that much of a surprise, or Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. It is a surprise that they're getting that much support from the Democratic Party as the Likud when yet Obama tried to interfere in the Israeli elections 2015 to get the I think he tried to get the Israeli Labor Party in power, one of the more left wing parties, point being. But The Middle East is relatively calm this week, aside from some news with Iran, which is pretty recent news. So we'll get more as time will tell. But again, it looks like after Biden's strike about what was that, a month and a half ago, about 6 weeks ago, on the pro-Iranian groups in Syria, things have continued on as business as usual. I think Biden really just wanted that show of force to Iran before we entered into tentative negotiations. But it looks like those sort of strikes, and it looks like Israel's also been quiet. None of that has deterred the pro-government forces and Russian push into Idlib, further into Idlib. As you see with this map every week. Now, it's very hard to tell on the map because it's very minuscule amounts every week. They just keep pushing further and further into Idlib. Now, you'll get some weeks where there's a lot of casualties. There was pretty heavy Russian bombing campaigns over the past few weeks, but uh, really all I can say about Syria is business as usual. It's just things happening around Syria are interesting with Iran, with the visits to Israel. And like I said, I think despite Syria being business as usual, we have to be in for the quote unquote grand finale soon enough, at least in terms of Idlib. See how that turns out. As I was saying a few weeks back, maybe they'll try this whole gas attack thing again. Maybe Assad will commit these horrible war crimes. They already tried pushing some of that propaganda with look at Assad's torture dungeons, look at how horrible conditions are in Syria's prisons, and we must intervene to put an end to this madness. But like I said, as it stands, Syria is continuing on as it has for the past few years now, and there's potential for a powder keg to be lit off. There's potential for a big happening in Syria. So keep your eye on it. I think we're due for it in the next few months here, probably getting into the summer. But that's all I have for Syria, really. If you have anything else.
The only thing I was going to mention is there is now an emerging Russian gas contract, which is basically hinting at a recovery taking place in Syria. At least, I mean, there's been a normalization in Damascus and Aleppo that has been established ever since Aleppo was retaken. Uh, so, there's it's a maritime area, so we've seen a lot of developments in the Eastern Mediterranean with new gas deposits that are being uncovered. It is disputed. It's about 2,000 and a quarter square kilometers. That is part of the Syrian-Lebanese maritime borders. Large reservoirs. They're thinking the proven reserves are 60 trillion cubic feet of gas. It's huge.
Yeah, and that's alone just the Syrian Lebanese side. That's not even getting into some of the disputes we've discussed, of course, last year
Yeah.
about Cyprus, Turkey, Egypt, etc.
Yeah, I mean, even the U.S. Geological Survey has hinted at 1.7 billion barrels of oil lying in the basin. So it is huge. There's oil and natural gas. And Soyuz Neft Gas is the Russian company that might take this up. So we will see. If this is the case, this is a big deal because it'll ostensibly be another Russian gas oil project. And this time in the Eastern Mediterranean.
Yeah, and that will probably do quite a bit for the Syrian economy, which has been teetering, to say the least, for the past decade, ever since the start of the war. Now, for a civil war, I have to admit, it's not saying much, but Syria's economy has stayed relatively stable for a country wrought with such chaos. Now, of course, that is in large part thanks to outside powers. You think mainly Russia, even Iran, but yeah, and like I said, with the recovery, you're already seeing the reconstruction. They've been discussing reconstruction deals since 2017, 2018. But it looks like with some of that, it's finally coming to fruition. And really, maybe it's because of so many internal issues, so many other issues, even up to Ukraine. The American regime, Biden, Kamala, whoever, have been pretty quiet on the Syria issue since the strike. You haven't really heard a word about it since now. Like I said, I'm not too surprised by that. I think everyone was pretty much expecting that. But really, with the Middle Eastern news, all I can say is keep your eye on this Israel visit by Austin and some of this news coming out of Iran and alleged attacking of. I, I think Israel allegedly attacked an Iranian vessel, but an Iranian oil vessel, that is. But not much more news of the Middle East, but going to the big Taiwan question now. It looks like the tech companies are, in particular, very afraid of some sort of Chinese action in Taiwan, and that they're really warning that we need to bolster defense with Taiwan. Pretty much the entire American establishment is saying this. Now, the big reason is, of course, it's the superconductors. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. This is probably going to show how ignorant I am about technology, but I'm not entirely sure what a superconductor is. Now, if somebody could give me a very brief, layman sort of explanation of it, I think I have a general idea what it is. But point being, it's tech stuff. That's all you really need to know about this, and Taiwan excels at producing them. Now, China has been more brazen in the past few years, in particular this past year, in terms of their actions in their region, in the South China Sea, in with their neighboring countries. And one thing they've been fear mongering about since Biden came into office is, well, the Chinese invasion of Taiwan is imminent, as it has been imminent for about what 30, 40 years now. I don't know, since the establishment of communist China, but it looks like in the same vein as the Ukraine thing, it's we have to defend Taiwan. We have to stand up for them. We have to stand by them because this is the most vital issue. This is the most vital national security issue. And the big push towards hawkishness on China is on. Now, I initially thought, and my original assumptions were pretty easily laid to rest as soon as it's happened, that Biden would try some sort of reconciliation with China, some sort of repairing of relations. Now, it doesn't look like that panned out. It looks like he's pretty much continuing on the Cold War footing towards China, which isn't too much of a surprise in and of itself, but I would have expected a little bit more effort in terms of trying to restore the sort of world order that Brzezinski would have wanted. Now, maybe that ship has just sailed too far by the time Trump had done what he had done, but the big push is we have to solidify our commitment to Taiwan. Taiwan, mind you, a country we don't even officially recognize. Our diplomatic situation, of course, we do take a sort of one China policy. I know that's their term for it, but we do sort of tolerate the one China policy in terms of Nixon pulled recognition of Taiwan, the quote unquote Republic of China, to China proper, or the quote unquote People's Republic of China, the communist regime. And it's been that way since 1970. Now, there have been people pushing, we need to recognize Taiwan, we need to solidify diplomatic relations with them. And I don't think we're at the point where they would take that brazen of diplomatic move. I think China would have to take a very aggressive action, do something completely unprecedented over the past, I don't know, 40 years in order for an official American recognition of Taiwan. Now, there is a push for it in a lot of circles. I don't think it's quite made its way into the political mainstream yet, but I think that it's going to be the next few. That's going to be the next issue in the few years here, with the push for recognize Taiwan, defend Taiwan, especially out of the mainstream conservative movement, especially out of that, and even probably on the Democratic side, saying we need to stand up for democracy, we need to defend this poor, defenseless nation. But it looks like it's coming all down to this, and this is probably the impetus for a real freezing over of relations between the Americans and the Chinese at this point. Now, I don't think this is going to be anytime soon. We have dealt with Taiwan diplomatically, unofficially, of course, since we pulled recognition from them. Trump even called Taiwan after he got elected president, saying, "Well, we're committed to your defense." I think he's still. Yeah, they ended up selling Taiwan weapons, which, because I remember talking about that, I remember thinking that was a really stupid idea, just in terms of using that as a bargaining chip, which, again, that's been thrown away. We've thrown away any bargaining chips for China in terms of we put ourselves in a position, at least if you want to legitimize this crumbling system, where we have to be in the position where we're on the aggressive footing with China. Now, again, as you've said previously, and I tend to agree, if or when China finally reintegrates Taiwan, it will not be the move of an invasion. It will be something, I don't know, maybe similar to a Crimea situation where they sort of march in unopposed and there's not really any fighting at all. But I still maintain if or when China is to reintegrate Taiwan, it will be a bloodless coup, so to speak. It will be a process where it is officially done. I don't know, maybe something will happen to the point where they have no choice but to accept it. American power collapses in the region, whatever. But Taiwan, I don't know, it may be a strong arming, but I don't see an outright invasion of the island where it's millions of people displaced and thousands of casualties, etc. But again, I could be wrong about that, but I think if it were going to happen at any point, we would see more signs of it if it hadn't already happened by now. Now, of course, the other big push in terms of East Asia is the American establishment is now trying to encourage Japan to be more militaristic and take up more of the responsibility, American security burdens in the region. You've seen this, again, pawning off power
Right.
to other quote unquote regional empires. Turkey's a big example. Some of these Eastern European countries and these European countries in general, leaving the defense more in their quote unquote own hands. And it looks like it's finally Japan's turn. Now, we've discussed previously, Japan is actually in a very good position to exploit this new Cold War because they can they can cozy up to China. They can try to thaw diplomatic relations while still maintain good foot with the Americans. As I've said, they could be like the Turkey of East Asia if they wanted to. And I know Abe's out of power. I know he was a decent statesman, but I think if Japan, especially if they get their act together and find somebody who is just a competent statesman to conduct Japanese diplomacy again relatively competent manner, they could really be milking both sides of this for all it's worth. And I don't know. It looks like for the time being, Japanese policy is pretty pro-American in that they're going to take the opportunity to militarize and become a regional power in defense of American interests. But maybe as time goes on, especially as American power wanes, we'll see where they can extract more concessions from America because America has less power to exert, and also cozy up to China because if China can ease tensions with one of its historical rivals, I think they would. And people talk about like China and Japan will never get along. Yes, they have a very bloody history. You know what other two countries have a very bloody history? Russia and Turkey. How many Russo-Turkish wars were there? Well, wasn't there like 7 or 8 by the time it was all said and done? And that's including like just up in recently, World War One, and even like again, even Russian Turkish relations recently with Turkey shooting down Russian jets and their forces clashing in Syria. But point being is, when there are attractive enough offers on the table, historical rivalries can be put aside at least temporarily to exploit that. Now, I'm not saying China and Japan are going to become best friends, but like I said, Japan has a real opportunity here to become a power broker in the region, and that comes from everything from Southeast Asian issues, the South China Sea, to the Korean Peninsula, to China and its territorial borders, and pretty much, if like I said, if Japan can get a leader that will play its cards right, it will benefit immensely from this current situation. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see.
Well, I take two things out of this, maybe three. One is, an invasion by China in Taiwan would be incredibly difficult, and the main reason for this is that Taiwan does not have great beachheads where large forces can disembark and invade the island. Much of the coast is very craggy, it's very rough, it's difficult to land. There's only one or two choice spots. It would be a killing zone if the Chinese were to try to forcefully take over. And this is why I agree with you that they're probably playing the long game. And this is basically to demonstrate to the region, including Japan, that America's not really in charge here. It's not the early 2000s. That period is over with. We can do this. We can fly over Taiwan if we want to. We can go around its borders. We can let Taiwan know that they're really China, and so on and so on. And so I imagine that they are developing a game where Taiwan basically becomes a vassal eventually to China, and that can only happen if Taiwan itself recognizes that America will not be able to defend it, or even even more strange. Let's say in 30 years, uh, America's barely in the region. Who knows? Uh, just the fact that America would ask Japan, for instance, to increase its military and to take over some of those duties that America was fulfilling for over half a century, um, is kind of proof of what China is getting at, anyways. Right? That America can't do it. It's stretched too thin. Its forever wars in the Middle East have depleted it. It has had to adopt a very different strategy. Its adventures have not been very successful, generally speaking, of the last 20 years. So, yeah, I would say that's those are the main points.
Yeah, but with that being said, I think it's very important that we defend our superconductors because apparently only Taiwan can make those, and there's no alternatives. Not China, not India, not Korea, not
None.
Japan. It looks like Taiwan is the only place capable of producing superconductors, which we apparently need or apparently very vital. But you know what? I think that is worth throwing away the last bit of the American Empire for. I think it's definitely a worthy cause to defend the profits of people like I don't know what's his name what's the Apple Tim Cook and I don't even know who owns Google now at this point. It's changed so much. They've obfuscated so much about these tech companies. Is Bill Gates even still involved in Microsoft? I don't think he is. I think he stepped down for that. But point being is, I can't wait for America to expend its last bit of geopolitical relevance defending the profit margins of people who have no love or affinity for this country or its people at all for superconductors. And you know what? I think it's the real lesson we can take away. And I think that's a wonderful legacy the American Empire will leave behind. And I would not want it any other way. I'll have you know that. And so long as we don't have to use Chinese superconductors, so long as the Taiwanese ones, I can live with that. But I suppose with all that being said, I hope you all had a good week. I hope that you found this very informative and entertaining. We'll see you guys next time, and goodbye.
Okay.